G'day everyone, welcome back to the shed. Today you've caught me in the middle of making a floor pan for my HG ute here, and like most panels it requires a sequence of events and quite a few machines to make what you want. So for this particular pan, it's got this curl up at the front and a curl down at the back, but it's got all these lines pressed into it, and I've only got a few of them in so far. So talking about sequences, you have to decide what goes in first because it will stop you doing other things. So looking at this pan, I decided I would get the rough shape in place first. So prior to putting any of these stiffeners on it, I put this curl in here, put a little bit of a curl in it back there, roughly in the right place, and I could lay that in the car and get an idea of where things were going to go. So from there, I have marked pretty much the centre of this bend and measured back from there to get the accuracy for the lines. I chose to do these two first because they were made in the Pullmax, and the particular piece of tooling's got a little flange on each side that runs through, and if we'd done these lines the opposite way, we would be running into those and squashing the ends of those in as we're running these lines. Also, these are nice straight lines through here. This back one's got a little bit of a bend out there in there, but to do that I've added a piece of material that I just screwed onto the end of the sheet on the right angle so I could run this against the fence in the Pullmax. Now if we have a look at that, this is the fence on the machine, and the trick for getting nice straight lines with any machine work is to run things against the fence. Now, a fence is just a fancy machinist way of saying the guide. So this is a movable guide, we can move it in and out, and for our two lines, the first part of the two lines was parallel. And this car being designed in Imperial and built in Imperial, it was exactly 5 inches. So I set the fence up, I ran the one line through there, and then I've just adjusted the fence 5 inches further forward, and I've got the second line for the parallel portion. And the tooling for this type of line is very simple. Just a piece of square bar coming up from the base, I've welded a piece of metal onto it, and I've ground a little trench through it so that I can get the base of the line through there, and the top piece is the same, but I've put it in the lathe and I've machined a little circular disc on the bottom of that, and that forms the actual trench. For these other lines, I've been doing them in the bead roller. Now there's going to be a sequence of lines running across the sheet. There's a sequence in here, and there's also a pressing in the top here that just presses out into this area here, so we'll do that later. But to keep the sheet in the shape I've wanted it, I've made these two formers, and they follow the shape of the original car floor. So they're screwed on the edge, and this area through here to about this section here is going to sit on top of the inner rocker panel, and it'll have a series of plug welds through here. So I can actually use these screw holes, drill them out and MIG weld through them, and that will secure the floor into the car. So I'm not actually doing anything to my sheet that's going to be a problem later on. From here forward, it's folded, and it actually folds downward like that and around like that. So once again, we're still in the area where we're going to be doing plug welds. So these screw holes are not a problem. I've allowed myself a little bit more room on the sheet, and so this edge here will be trimmed to fit, and this area will be cut off altogether. The simple edge for these straight lines was just fold each end of the sheet, and I have allowed myself a bit of extra material. So this will be trimmed back below the fold line, and there'll be a new fold put in, which I think from memory comes across, and it just rolls around the corner, and that fits up into the inside of the firewall. So that's all easy peasy sort of stuff, but you've got to plan it before you start it, because like I say, you can get halfway through, you can put a fold in or run a line through something and then realise that the things adjacent to it just won't work because you haven't got enough room for your machine to work around it. So that's that little project to there. I often use little guides, fences and things like that that I will either clamp to a piece of metal I'm working, or screw to a piece of metal, or even weld to it. And here's a few of them here. This one is for the bottom of the rear quarter panel section on these Holdens, and this gives me the shape from an original. I formed it off that, and I can spot this to my sheet or tack it to the screw it to the sheet, and I can use that as a fence as I'm working it through the machine. These ones here, same car again, but these do the bottoms of the fenders, the wheel arches, just where they come down the bottom, and they've got shape both directions. So one of them matches the curve of the car as it curls underneath the car at the base, and the other one is the curve for the wheel arch, and these run against the edge of the Pullmax tools, and that's how they work. If we come over here to our brown door for the brown ute, now this will be our project once we get going full steam again with our proper editing, when our new computer's going. So I haven't done anything to it. This is a set of tools I made years ago for doing another one of these cars, and the fence on this one is this little point on the end here. So what I do is I cut a piece of sheet metal the length of the door that I'm working on, and I put this little fold in the bottom of it to actually form the lip that'll get crimped around, and then that fold will actually run through between the tools and form the fence, so that as we feed our sheet through, this is going up and down in the Pullmax, we're putting this line and this little curved shape into our sheet as we go. Now, getting a little bit ahead of ourselves, when you're planning a door repair, now most people will buy a part of a door skin or a full door skin for your car, but we'll keep it to the part door skins. You really need to look at the inner structure of your door and the amount of repair needed. Because when we look at this door, we've got this big long opening in here that's easy to get to. Many doors later in the 1970s have got anti-intrusion bars just inside the skin to stop a side impact from another car coming through and attacking you, and they make it difficult to repair. Many cars have got boxed in sections down here and smaller holes. So when you're planning a rust repair like we're doing with this one, we've got to look at the inside frame and decide where's the easiest place for us to get our hands inside the door and work with a dolly. Because quite often when you're welding it, to stay in control, you're going to have to just bring your weld back to life, pick it up a little bit or knock it down a little bit if it's distorting a little bit, just to be able to continue to weld through there. So for this particular door, we've pretty much got anywhere from way down here right up into here. That's a nice easy section to work from, and even coming the other way, we can get our hand in, hold our dolly up through here, and we can actually get all the way along the skin. If you're not so lucky and you're looking at the door and where your repair needs to come to, you might say, I've got some accident damage down here and I want to replace that, and it comes up into here. So maybe you want to make a skin that comes up to here instead of putting a full skin on it. Now, if you've got a door with an anti-intrusion bar, and recently I did the door for Dave's LTD, it had a big wide intrusion bar, anti-intrusion bar that ran all the way through here, and it had a lot of old damage to the door. And it really was one of those doors that I should have thrown away and found a better one, but we hunted around a bit and rattled a few trees and nothing sort of fell in our direction. So it was a case of repair what we had. And the door was bad. It had had old repairs in it, there was an old smash repair, and there was a lot of filler in it already. So I came right up and I cut the door just under the key barrel, and I came across the door with there and put a weld across there, but it was right near the top of the anti-intrusion bar. So all the openings in the door, I couldn't come in from this direction. So it was a very cautious weld, tacked, welded little sections, got myself along. And there was only about 3 or 4 spots that I actually had to work with a hammer and dolly to get it right. To do that, I got a long tyre lever, slid it through the window opening, worked it across the edge of the anti-intrusion bar, and I could pick my low spots up with the tyre lever, put a bit of pressure on there, and then work around the area with the hammer to actually bring the low spots up and get it back to a flat door again. So all of these things we need to be looking at before we start cutting a door up and deciding where we're going to cut it, how big a patch we're going to put on it, and things like that. So it comes back down to the whole thing. Stay in control of it, make sure you've got it at the right spot, make sure your piece that you've got for the door is the right size, and then go from there. Often we will buy a reproduction section or even make a piece, and it might not be exactly the same as the factory. And naturally, handmade parts, the guys that make stuff for Australian cars are sort of between a rock and a hard place, really, because of our numbers of our cars that survive, and the number of people repairing them is really very low. So people making a replacement section for one of these Holdens might be making 3 or 4 a month or 5 or 6 a month to suit demand. Others might be making hundreds a month, things like that. But we're not making tens of thousands at a time. So it's not economically viable to actually make a full-size press to stamp these out like the factory did and get exactly the same piece each time. So the people that make them will have a sequence of events they're making with hand tools, and sometimes you will get a discrepancy between these lines from what the factory was, and you'll go to put it on your car and you say, oh, this is no good, but it's the best these people are doing and it's better than nothing. So what can you do if you get your new piece of door home and you find out that there is a little discrepancy and there's going to be a problem? Now, the biggest mistake we can make is to put this bottom fold where it is on the door if this is in a different spot. So what I do is I pick the feature on the door that's most prominent. And when you look at this car, if we're going to do a join somewhere in between this line through here and this one down here, this is a difficult line to change on the door skin. This one here, if it's lower down or higher up, we can either add material to it or remove material from it to correct it. So I always work on the line that is the most prominent. So in this case, it's this one here. So I will get a mark from the centre of this fold, and I will measure up a convenient distance on the door that is above the area where I'm going to be cutting and welding it and grinding paint away from. And I will scribe a datum line in there so that I've got a reference point for where this line was there. Disregard this one altogether. Then get the new section in place, and I'll cut away the old section of panel, and I'll leave myself a little bit of waste material so that we can align the panel on the door, and we can check a datum line here, datum line there, datum line at the back, and if they all line up, we know that our new section will have this line exactly in the same place on the door as the original. We can get a nice deep scribe line all the way along the top of our new section of door, and then we can carefully trim along that scribe line, and then we know when we butt it up that we can actually have this feature in line with the same on the fender, the same on the rear door or the quarter panel depending. And if this one here is a few millimetres either way, we can correct that. So if it's just a little bit low, these cars had fairly wide gaps along the bottom anyway, and you're only doing a utility or a panel van, you might find that that's not going to matter. But you can, before you weld it together, flatten that out and refold that a little bit different if you've got access to a folder, or even, like my little steel bench, fold it along the edge of a piece of steel beam, correct that. If it's only high by a millimetre or two, we can add steel to the bottom of that with a MIG welder. And the same thing as doing a weld along a panel, series of tacks all the way along, weld onto your tacks and slowly work it without getting the panel too hot, and then just grind the surface flat both sides, and then you want a little radius on the bottom to come back to a natural looking metal edge. So all achievable, but once we get into this door and start repairing it for real, we'll talk about that a lot more in depth, and we'll show you some of these things. I'll probably do a few things deliberately and then repair them, and that way we can actually see some of the pitfalls that might happen with doing this sort of work and how to get out of it. Thanks for watching, guys. I'm Rob Teal. I'll catch you next time.
14 minutes.
There you go,
All
with
done,
one muff up in the middle.
Anything else you want to talk about before we turn it off?
No, turn it off.